Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Global Renaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Barron. I'm with my brother, my co-host, Tchorzky. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing all right. This week definitely tried to take the kid out, but we surviving. I hope y'all are too.
Facts. So today it's like February 11th, something like that. It's Black History Month, and I really wanted to keep that in mind kind of as we go through our discussions today. Obviously, we're both Black, so I think there's something to discuss there. The first thing, whenever I think of Black History Month, the first thing, it's just a terrible month. Like, why is it in February? Why did they give us the shortest month?
Hold on,
why
is it my birthday
why
month?
Is it, I mean, facts, but it's like, I just feel like when I run for president, vote Barron 2036, I'm moving Black History Month to June to coincide with Juneteenth, and we're going to get the Black History Month cookouts popping. So just make sure you vote Barron 2036. But on a real note, I think it's super important, like, especially, you know, for us, we were talking kind of as we were coming over here, just about some of the things that we've experienced, you know, going to school and stuff like that. How would you say, when do you feel like you understood what it meant to be Black? Not necessarily like, oh, all the things that come with it, but just like, I am a Black person, like you became conscious of race. When did that happen for you?
I think, well, it starts, I'm from Mattapan, Boston. One of, I guess people say one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Boston, but really the Mattapan I know is really about family values and just, good times. But definitely being outside of that environment and going to a private school, BC High, obviously.
Yeah.
It definitely was eye-opening for me. I had to reconcile with, like these experiences that I've been so used to, that the people I grew up with, the way I was used to talking, the way I was used to, having my swag or whatever, it wasn't universal.
Yeah.
And then I realized, not only is it not universal, but I'm not the majority at all. Like these people here are all accustomed to a certain kind of living, a certain lifestyle that I was not privy to. So I think the first time, just in my own understanding that Blackness was that stark of a contrast, was when I definitely went to private school, coming from public and charter education.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. For me, I grew up in a suburb, so like most of my town was white. So I kind of noticed that difference and distinction a little bit earlier on. So like I remember being a kid, and I'm super grateful for my parents for this, but I have an older sister, and so she went through elementary school. Like she's three grades ahead of me. So I remember her being like first, second grade, and they would always have parents come in to volunteer to read to the students. And so my mom would go in to read to her classrooms, and she would always read stuff that was like Black. You know what I'm saying? It would be by Black authors, right? She was a big fan of Maya Angelou. She named my sister after Maya Angelou. And so I would go with her because I'm like 3, so I can't stay at home by myself. So I would literally go in and listen to these things, and I would always remember, you could see the difference, right? The kids who are listening to this, most of them aren't Black, so they're not used to this, and you can tell the difference. And I would also remember, like, we would talk about stuff like just the reality of slavery. Even just, I remember being in, I think it was first grade, and they asked us a question like, was Christopher Columbus a hero? And I said no, because my parents had told me like what actually happened. Like he came over and he like killed all the natives and stuff like that. And just for me, it was something that it became very apparent what race was, because like I can literally see the difference between me and all of the kids that I was around. And I think that it just happened for you at a different moment. But how did you internalize that difference when you first became cognizantly aware of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, going in hand with what you were saying, I think it was the fact that I had recognized race as a differentiating point, but I hadn't recognized that how I had internalized that.
Yeah.
The internalization piece of what you're mentioning is when I got to the school, and like I mentioned that Mattapan was a dangerous place. I didn't really see it as that until I reconciled with other people who had that narrative, probably from their parents, like you were saying, like or wherever they got it from. And then I became, now I'm this kid from this dangerous place. Whereas it was just like, that's where I'm from. That's what I know. And I think that that point you talked about the realities of slavery, and continuing to, even to this day, I feel like I'm furthering my understanding of what it means to be Black and the concept of Blackness in general, because I'm constantly learning more, and I'm learning more about the atrocities of slavery as they actually occurred, and not just, oh, like slavery was bad and then let's keep going. No, we need to know the details. We need to know our history so that it doesn't repeat itself, one. And then two, that we don't, misrepresent ourselves just as, impoverished or you know what I mean, in disenfranchised peoples, where the history, despite the trauma or whatever, it's a very resilient story as well. So I think it's important, especially this month, to recognize.
Did you so knowing that, okay, the place you come from, people have this kind of conception that it's a dangerous place, it's the hood, it's the ghetto, whatever. You talk a certain way, you dress a certain way, you have a certain way of going about things that is informed by the place where you grew up. When you went to school and most of the people aren't from there and they have these conceptions about the place that you're from, and they associate certain things like the way you dress, the way you talk, with this idea of ghetto or whatever. How did you then navigate being authentic, but also trying to not promote a stereotype, if you get what I'm saying?
Right. No, absolutely. Like, because it's so hard, because especially when you're young, you want to fit in, you want to, be accepted and validated by your peers. But then what happens when that acceptance is at the cost of your authenticity? So what that forced me to kind of get into is like really trying to be palatable to a lot of different audiences, and trying to like, okay, maybe you have this preconceived notion of who I am, but my personality is so multifaceted that there's something we gotta agree on. There's something that we can communicate with. Like, I like to tell jokes. I like to, you know what I mean? Trevor knows we laugh about everything.
Facts.
So like, that would be my starting point to try to bridge that gap, is focus more on our similarities and our difference. But then I feel like I got to a point where I started to not necessarily downplay my difference, but like not really interact with it or process it in the way that I should. Which subconsciously it was very impactful. But I think what the opposite of that is that it allowed me to be kind of so stubbornly, I don't want to say stubbornly, but passionately invested in my own identity and establishing myself as an individual and standing on my values. So it's like it's give and take. So you have to strike that balance of meeting people where they're at and also standing for something.
I think that's important, because one of the things for me, I grew up with a very strong sense of self, which was instilled in me from my parents, and so by the time I got to private school, I'm like, I understand who I am, I understand why I'm here. I'm here so that I can set myself up to go to college, so I can do these things, and so whatever it is that you're about to tell me, I don't really care. But at the same time, it's like, I was stubborn. I was stubborn. I won't even. There's no other way to put it. Like, I'll be in your face telling you who I don't really care. But it was also one of those things that like you said, kind of figuring out how to display your identity. Can you maybe talk about like how you, first of all, if you had to describe yourself in like a nutshell, which I know is hard to do, but if you had to, can you describe like who you are, and then can you describe the process of you figuring out who you were?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, that's a good question. I am first and foremost, I think, a free spirit who is very invested in my own faith, and I think that allows me to connect with other people. And that I say that because part of me is a reflection of you. So for me, understanding that is like how I interact with other people is a reflection of how I interact with myself. So I had to understand that, I feel like, to really get a foundational understanding of who I am, one. Two, I'm, a fun-loving person. I like to laugh. I like to have fun, but I'm also very intellectually curious. So I like to step outside of my comfort zone a lot of times, which sometimes intimidates people because I have boundaries. I do believe in kind of, a principle. I'm very principled, but I also am a troll. So like,
for sure. No, that's a fact.
Fair. So like, all in all, I feel like I'm still always evolving. That's part of me too. Like, I'm always changing. Like, I could say this today, and then maybe I might be exposed to different information, and then think of things in a different way. So I'm also very like fluid, very adaptable. So
is there a significant change you've noticed within yourself over the last like 5-10 years?
You tell me. No, but
I mean, we could get into it if you want.
Oh, but no, I definitely have experienced a significant amount of change, and I think I urge everybody to welcome change, because that's how you grow. That's how you build upon those foundations, that you've established from your parents or your experiences, community, whatever it may be. But I think the ways that I've changed are very interesting, because I don't like to look at things in the duality of like good or bad, but they just are.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things that I used to be a very confrontational person. I used to be very adamant about speaking up for myself and vocal, even if it meant like disrespecting you, because I didn't tolerate disrespect, and I thought that for me respect was earned, and if I had to have a relationship where it was based on power instead of friendship, you're gonna respect me regardless.
Yeah.
So I think that was the understanding that I had, or outlook I had, based off of just my past experiences of being disenfranchised or powerless. I tried to impose that on others, and I had to change that mindset. And I felt like I reflected a lot more on my emotional state.
Yeah.
And my emotions, and I think that allowed me to be a much more well-rounded person. Now the detriment of that is like I had an experience where I tried to nullify my emotions completely, and just like, I'm too much for people. I'm too out there. And I shrunk myself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a dangerous place to be, because your light, what you are, your essence is meant to be, shared, is meant to be expressed. Even in those times where like you have your own little niche, you have your own little thing that you like to do, it's meant to be celebrated, and you should never feel like you have to hide. And I think that's, one way I've changed, but it's one way that I've definitely evolved, because it allowed me the reverence to be like, no, like shine in all your glory, shine in all your light.
Yeah, it's a I think it's like a balancing act, because I used to be very similar. Like I had absolutely no problem asserting myself, and if you didn't like me, I'm okay with that. I'd honestly, to me, like, you disliking me, you liking me, as long as you're thinking about me, it's the same thing. And so I really had no problem. I was very confrontational. I really thrived within conflict. And on the one hand, it got some of the things that I wanted to accomplish, where I could walk around and you're not going to say nothing to me, because if you do that, like, I have no problem having a problem. But at the same time, that's very much detrimental to building relationships. And as you get older, you realize like these relationships matter a lot more than me trying to assert this dominance. And so for me, like, that transition really happened at like kind of halfway through high school, because I remember like middle school, early high school, like I was very much like super confrontational. Like I really did not care. And at a certain point I was like, this is not sustainable, right? If I want to make a true impact, if I want to be able to grow as a person, this is not sustainable. And so I started trying to make those small changes. But for me, once I went to college, because your reputation precedes you. Yeah. And so once people had that idea in their head of like, this is how Trevor is, it was very hard for me, no matter how nice I tried to be or whatever, like it was very hard for people to kind of shift their, notions of who I was. But once I got to college, I realized like, hey, I have the opportunity to kind of hit the reset button on how people view me. And I really realized how important that was, because there was a time where I was like, I don't care what you think about me. It doesn't matter. And to a certain extent, it doesn't. But it also does. Like, we're communal beings, so you can't just go through life not caring what people think about you, because it will be a detriment to you, right? They say your network is your net worth. So it's like, okay, if I want to go get a job, right, what this person thinks about me matters. What my interviewer thinks about me matters. What my boss thinks about me matters, right? What my classmates, my peers, what they think about you matters. And that was one of the biggest realizations I had to have, where it's like, okay, there's a way where I can be myself. I can be 100% myself, and I don't have to minimize myself, but I also don't have to try to kind of superimpose my presence over somebody else. I don't have to assert dominance over somebody else. If I'm truly confident in myself, everybody else will feel that, and that will do the talking, as opposed to me having to walk in here and say I'm better than you. And so that was one of the biggest realizations that I had. But I also think part of the reason I was like that, it was like almost like a defense mechanism, because you know what it was like to be in a space where like people are looking at you and they don't think you belong there, regardless of what your merit is. They don't think you belong there. And that for me was always the biggest thing, because like, again, like I was very aware of who I was. That was instilled in me from a very young age. I knew where I was going. And so like I didn't have a problem telling people that. I remember like I made a bet with a kid my freshman year of high school that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna bet you $50 that I get into Harvard. This is freshman year of high school. Now I won the bet. But it was like that was who I was, and I was telling people that. And on the converse, I had people saying like, like you're not, and like if you do, it's only because you're black, which is like okay, whatever. But at the same time, like I'm in defense mode now because like this is what you're telling me that no matter what I do, I didn't earn it, and so I felt the need to assert the fact that no, this is who I am. I earned this stuff. But after a while, you realize like all the talk is cheap. It's cheap. The results are going to prove themselves. So that was one of the biggest things that I had to, learn for myself. And I definitely think like me and you were very similar in that. And like, I remember when we linked up, it was like 3 years ago, like you came to the track meet at school. And like, I think we were just having a conversation. We both realized like we had mellowed out like for real.
Yeah.
What do you think, what do you think caused that? What was the catalyst for that change for you?
I think it was part getting back to myself, you know what I mean? It was like unlearning the version of me that is responsive and defensive to, I guess, the rejections of the world or in response to other people. And really just like you were saying, like I think you said it beautifully, just staying on what you believe in and moving in your own confidence and understanding that people gonna feel that energy regardless. So I think to that point, I feel like a lot of times in high school, we were both so, I guess, headstrong.
Yeah.
That we even got into a
lot.
Quite often. Yeah, quite often. You know what I mean? We have similar philosophies on a lot of things, but practice is always different from person to person.
Yeah.
So you're always going to have disagreements there. But what I always respected is that you were always, I said it before, 10 toes. Like Trevor told us freshman year, he's like, I'm gonna get into Harvard, and we thought it was always talk because Trevor could talk big.
I could.
He could talk big. Then we have the podcast, so homie could talk big. But it was always, he didn't even like. That was one area where it wasn't even like you saw the I need to defend myself. I need to prove something to y'all. It's just like y'all gonna see. And lo and behold, like he came early decision applied to Harvard, and he got in, and he shut everybody up. And he came in and he was just like, what now? And we were just like, what now?
Facts.
Congrats. So it's like, that's how you got to move through life sometimes. Sometimes if people don't see it, if you don't, you know what I mean, necessarily got to prove it to nobody, you just got to let your actions show. So I got into a mindset of, let me make my words match my actions, and hopefully people will see the genuine authenticity I move with.
Yeah.
And if not, then I'm gonna be the villain in some people's story, but I always try to take ownership, and I think authenticity is the only way to be able to sleep at night, and making sure that you go to sleep with a clear conscience that you engage with everybody based on whatever standards you hold. You know what I mean? Everybody has the free will to do whatever they want, but it's like, how are you moving? Like, how are you choosing to move?
Yeah. No, literally, like I can't control, at the end of the day, I can't control how you interpret what it is that I do or say, but I can't control what it is that I do or say. So if I know something that I do or say is more likely going to lead to you thinking something negative about me, well, then maybe I shouldn't do it in that way, regardless of being right. Because I think that was one of my biggest things. I didn't matter. If you didn't like me, if I was right, I didn't care. Like, I'm right. So, but that's just it's not the best way to move. So I think being cognizant of the fact that, like you said, if you move in a way that's authentic to you, you will have no problem sleeping at night. It doesn't matter if that person doesn't like you, because like, hey, I put my best foot forward. Not everybody's going to like that, but that's not my problem. So I think that's super important. So one of the other things that I wanted to think about, we were talking about a bit about identity, but recently I go on TikTok a lot, and I see the conversations that are happening just on the internet as a whole. And I think over the past couple of years being in school, and I'm sure you probably experienced this too, but like we used to have so many conversations in school about the dynamics between black men and black women. And it always, to me, felt like there was a huge gap. Like there was just a gap of understanding. And, again, we went to an all boys high school. And we spent a lot of time at school. So we're not getting the perspective of women, much less black women, while we're in school. So for me, once I got to college, I tried to do as much listening as possible. Though I do like to talk, I did try to do a lot of listening. But what I wanted to ask was like, how do you view yourself as a black man in relation to black women? Do you feel like the person you are now, do you feel like some of the things that you've seen, you know, some of the complaints, whether it be like, you know, black women don't respect black women, this, that, and third, do you feel like you at a point fed into that? Do you feel like you've grown out of that? Like, how do you, where are you at in terms of that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. I love black women.
We absolutely do. Shout out to black women.
We love black women here. All right, this ain't no other podcast, no names, but we love black women here. But for sure, I can say that I think your point about the lack of understanding is right on the money, especially within the black community. I feel like you hear a lot of, oh, so-and-so is, you know, dating outside their race, or so-and-so is not contributing, you know, the ideal stereotypes of what a man or woman should provide to the relationship within the black community. So I think there's a lot of commentary. And for me personally, I think that people need to do what works for their relationship.
Yeah.
I think we need to get outside of kind of like the gender binary understanding of person A has this set of genitalia, so they need to subscribe to this set of social standards and norms and responsibilities so that we can operate in this type of way, so that we can have kids. But you want to have kids, you don't even raise them yourself. So how you going to have some kids? You don't even know what to teach them. So like, how about we get back to really kind of building those. I mean, it's tough too because a lot of people don't have those family structures, those family dynamics to really teach them. Like for me personally, I was raised by predominantly black women. Like I have a single mother. My grandmother emigrated from Haiti in 2016. My aunt been here living in New York, so she's a little detached, but I see her regularly. So I was raised predominantly by all women. So my experiences and the way I look at life has definitely been structured from that standpoint. Obviously, I have a lot of male influences. I went to an all-boy high school. Like I have my core group of friends are, you know, both genders, but I have a lot of masculine energy in my life as well. But I say that to say that my foundational access point has definitely been from a standpoint of seeing women be the caretakers, the providers. Like my mom is both my dad and my mom. So with that understanding of how I was raised, I definitely look at a lot of the frustrations of black women outside of dating and within the dating world as one valid, because I think back to your point about learning how to listen and learning how to, I feel like that's one job that black men in general can do better at. I feel like even me specifically is actually listening to black women, because a lot of times they aren't necessarily granted the platform or the access to have their opinions or their values, I guess, you know, spread out or disseminated. But we typically have that means. And most times you see that men don't use that platform to really highlight the black women in our community. And instead, you know, just as quick as we quick to like post memes or like clown whatever our situations that be having real hurt, real pain behind them, people will not post somebody's business up there. People will not share somebody's podcast. People will not, you feel me? So I feel like we need to separate ourselves from just this whole, like back and forth between the men and the women in our community when everybody ain't shit. We all going through it. We all trying our very best. But it's like once we can get a common ground where we're like, all right, here's the issues. What can everybody bring to the table to try to advance us forward?
Yeah, and I think that's important because like the reason I brought it up because again, like I think there are commonalities, and this doesn't just go for black men and black women. And I'm speaking on a binary, but this is inclusive to everyone. But like, like I think overall, if you look at a lot of the discourse that's happening, especially online, there's like a gender war going on. It's like it's because it gets views, it's popular or whatever. But I think it's divisive. But it's also, it does highlight a difference that for me, one of the things that I don't like is that people take the opportunity and the platform that they have to increase the divisive discourse rather than being like, okay, listen, I, as a man, don't fully understand what it's like to be a woman. I probably never will, but I can at least understand better. And as women, you might not totally understand what, you know, my perspective is. So what I'm going to do is instead of coming on here and trying to be like, y'all wrong, we're right. I'm just going to put out how I think. And at some point or another, we might come to a level of understanding. Because I know for me, like when I was 16, 17. Like, I grew up listening to Lil Wayne, you know what I'm saying?
You
All
know
these
the
different
GOAT.
rappers, you know what I'm saying? I listen to people when I'm like 9 years old who are talking about, I'm fucking red bones, I want a bad bitch with a fat ass. Like, this is the stuff that I'm listening to at like 8 or 9.
Blowing.
Yeah, and it's like, you don't
12 years later.
you don't, hey man, but you don't realize how that stuff affects you and how you perceive the people you are in community with. And that was one of the things that I realized when I got to school and we were having all these conversations, because we would literally have like email threads, Twitter threads, like community, like we would literally get in a room and everybody would talk and share their opinion. And a lot of times it was the niggas ain't shit show. That's really what it was, where, you know, you had a lot of the women in the room being like, yo, y'all ain't shit, like y'all need to get it together. And for a lot of us, we were like, yo, like why are you always coming for us? But at the same time, that's almost like a defensive response. We're like, damn, like you just gonna come for me like that, as opposed to being like, all right, let me listen. Let me hear what you're saying, and let me figure out where the actual like areas where I can improve are. Right. And I do think it's something that we all as a people, whether it just be in our community or the community at large, we need to do a better job of like actually wanting to do better for each other. Because like I was saying before, like we are social beings. We live in community. You cannot get rid of that fact. So we have an obligation to each other. And I think it's important that as the faster we recognize that and the faster we start making strides in, you know, for the purpose of improving community, we will all do better individually. Because right, I'm a better person because you're a better person. Because you help me become a better person, I can help you become a better person. And the more people you have doing that, working together, we all benefit. But right now, I feel like one of the biggest problems is that people are more interested in stuff in conflict because people are attracted to conflict. And so they're trying to get their names out there, do this, that, and the third, but it makes it very, very difficult for these divides to get bridged. And it's one of those things that I think we have such an opportunity to bridge right now because of technology, because of all of the advancements we've been able to make. But I just don't think it's happening as much as it could. But like I said, it just goes to show, like, yo, if you're somebody who has a perspective, like, offer that with the intentions of improving yourself and trying to help improve understanding. I think that's really my biggest thing. And that's really what I try to do with my podcast. Like, I try to get as many different perspectives as possible because I know, like, as much as I like to hear myself talk, as much as I think I'm a smart person, I don't know everything, right? I have a very limited perspective. So the more perspectives that we can gain and we can mesh together and we can synthesize, the better off we'll be as a people.
For sure. Yeah, I think, like he hit the nail on the head. I think it's more about letting go of holding on so strongly sometimes to those convictions that, you know what I mean? Everybody has those things that you would die on the hill for. But it's like sometimes even those things you have to step outside yourself and like, where did I get that from? Yeah. Like, who was that passed down from? Like those stereotypes we perpetuate of, say we get into these town halls, these open forums, these podcasts, and we point fingers like, angry black woman, you a lazy black man, you not getting it. Who did these stereotypes come from? During Black History Month especially, it's important to realize that a lot of these are passed down from when they was trying to hold us down after Reconstruction. Yep. They couldn't, you know what I mean? Even before then, during slavery times, what type of sociological techniques did they use to keep us oppressed and separated and divided? And they're still using those same things today because we fighting internally. They banking on us fighting internally because they know together it will be unstoppable. Exactly. Like it's one of those things that like every single year we get those moments where we all get to celebrate each other, right? Whether it be like even like, you know, the NBA trade deadline. Like you look at something like that and you see all these, like, we watch basketball, we love basketball, but you get to watch greatness and you get to celebrate and you get to see what happens when a team works together. When a team wins a championship, the reason they won a championship is because everybody knew their role, everybody knew what they brought to the table, and everybody decided that I'm gonna star in my role. It doesn't matter. Like, listen, I might not be the person scoring 30 points a game, but if I can grab 12 rebounds, that's gonna help us win. If I star in my role and we all work together, you see what can happen. And I think if we took that approach as a community, it would do so much better. So I really am I'm hopeful that as things move forward, we'll be able to do more of that. But I think it comes from that awareness that you were talking about. Like, you have to understand, like, this divisiveness comes from a place. Like, this is not just random. It's not random that we are always in conflict with each other. But it
it's not productive. I don't think any of these conversations have ever been productive. As much as like, you know, like I said, I enjoy listening to people talk shit as much as the next person. Like we used to have a when I was in school, we used to have a meeting. They called it the Black Relationships meeting, where it was, like I said, it was basically niggas ain't shit. And I would go to that just to get entertained, because I knew there was nothing that was going to come out of this conversation. You have your opinion, this person has their opinion, y'all are going to argue, nobody's going to come to an agreement. And so I think if we actually make a conscious effort to understand each other and move for the betterment of the other person, we live, and I was having this conversation with somebody, but I think because of the country we live in, right? America's a very individualistic society. And so we're always looking out for ourselves. But when you understand that, again, if I help you in some roundabout way, it might not be directly, but that will end up helping me. I think that will benefit us all, but it's a mindset shift that needs to take place. And I don't think it has yet.
I agree because I feel like people are not always in a position to reconcile with the work that needs to be done to even come to that type of conclusion. It's like there's a lot of emotional healing, a lot of generational healing that needs to be taking place, not just within the Black community, but as a country, as the world. Like, especially at this time, you know, we used to look at 2012 and say, oh, the end of the world, like this dystopian future, like we live in it. Yeah. And it's like, what can you do? I know it's not much because we all feel hopeless, but you're not hopeless. You are very powerful. You can empower yourself and you can empower your community. Exactly. So it's like, what actions, what choices are you going to take to get you out of that mud, get you out of that, you know, rut, those patterns, those habitual patterns of toxicity or whatever it is that keep you from your bad, keep you from your greatness.
Yeah. And you gotta, and that's the thing. I've always been, and I talked to this one person, and we always say it always comes back to self-awareness. You have to be super aware. You have to reflect, and I think that's one thing that I know you do. And you can tell by the way you talk, the way you think, right? You reflect. But if you don't do that, it's very hard to move forward. If you don't look backwards, it's very hard to understand what you need to change moving forward. And I think, you know, when we talk about like generational healing, that's one of those things that there's been stuff passed down from generation to generation that people don't even understand is holding them back. And it could be the way you express yourself. It could be the way you're closed off to love. It could be all of these different things that exist in so many different people and manifest themselves in so many different ways. But if you don't have the capacity to even identify them, there's absolutely no way you can improve upon them. So it's like, whatever it might be, right? I'm a huge advocate for people going to therapy. Like I literally, I'm one of those people, and I know like, especially in the Black community, a lot of times people like look down on therapy, but like I've been going to therapy for 6 years. It's extremely helpful, right? Even when I feel good. And that was one thing that my mom's actually a licensed clinical social worker. So I remember I was feeling good. I felt like everything was fine. My mom was like, don't stop going. Don't stop going, because people think the only time you should go to therapy is if you're like crazy, depressed. Like, no, we are all working through something. So just because you think you're good doesn't mean you should stop. And it might not be like an actual therapist, right? But it could be the conversations you're having with your friends. It could be the conversations you're having with your elders. But one thing you should do is find the people that reflect the good in you, but also have something to add. Because once you do that and you find those circles, then you're able to improve yourselves. And again, you're all able to have this kind of give and take where I help you improve, you help me improve, and together as a unit, we all improve exponentially.
Yeah. That's the recipe right there.
Facts.
Write it down.
Come on.
And bottle it up.
But it's absolutely necessary. And I think like I've been thinking about this like so much recently. You know, the way we're going, like I personally believe in this. I don't know if this is like off the wall, but I think we're going to approach a critical juncture where it's like, listen, we're either going to go left or we're going to go right. And one of these options is going to doom us. And so like, I mean, especially like, I was a political science major. So once Trump got elected, like we had to read this book, like The Death of Democracy, and like how democracies die. And if you look at like America's been an empire for 100, 200 years, right? But all empires end. And so it's like at some point or another, the way we live, the way of life that we know will change. And it's going to be, is that change going to be positive or not? And I think that, like you said, we're all powerful people. We all have our own spheres of influence. And if you just resign yourself to the fact that, hey, I can't do anything, I can't change anything, well, then nothing's going to get changed. When you understand that, listen, the change starts with me. At the very least, I know I can change myself. I might not change nobody else, but if I can change myself, that's more than doing nothing. And if we all adopt that mindset, we'll be be able to affect positive change.
Come on now.
Come on.
I'm looking at the man in the mirror. If you got some mic in you today, you better listen to what he's saying.
For sure, but it's real.
It starts. That's where the change starts. It starts with, because it's like you're looking at all these big concepts and things that are way bigger than just us. Because if you really think about it, like, how big are we in the grand scheme of everything?
We're
Not
tiny.
to get meta, but like,
we're tiny. We don't matter.
Literally.
Yeah.
So like, how do we matter? Is that how we matter in relation to other people?
Exactly.
And how we give back and we exchange that energy and that that's where matter. Like, that's why it's called that.
Exactly.
No, that's like,
you know the Quincy chorus, right? It's like you matter, but it's like you are conscious matter. That I love that so much because it's like you like my thing is always like you in the grand scheme of life, like in the billions of years the Earth's been around, you're not important, you don't matter. But it's like also a freeing thing to realize, like, you know what, like, it's nothing's that deep. So let's just live our best life while we're here. But in order to do that, we have to do it together. Exactly. But it starts with you, right? You can't do anything for somebody else until you do. Lauryn Hill got that line. How you gonna win when you ain't right within? Yeah. You can't. It's not possible. You gotta look inside yourself, and that's one of the things over the years I've started to realize. Like, I'll have moments where I'm like, dang, like I really could have done better. Yeah. And it's like one of the hardest things.
Regret
it's one of the
scary
it's
thing.
not even a regret. It's just like I could have done better. Yeah. And it's like you have to be super honest with yourself, because again, I have a lot of pride, I have a lot of ego. But to say like, all right, you know what, in this instance I was wrong and I could have and should have done better is a monumental step to take, because once you accept that, then it's like, all right, how do I do that? Now when I'm in a situation similar, I'm able to recall that moment of like, oh, I remember when I didn't do what I could have done. Let me be better in this instance. And then you make those small gains, and over time, you're living an exponentially better life.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because it shows you that we go from like a lack mindset to how you can go from like, no, I can do this. I can make this happen for myself.
Exactly.
And that's what we need more of. Like, we need more love. We need more. Like, don't feel like you got to store it. You got to hold it. Like, I mean, like, yeah, protect yourself, keep your boundaries, and make sure that you're, not everybody has your best interest at heart. I understand that, and that what gets in the way a lot of times. But if you move in with pure intention, like, trust that you protect it. Trust that you good.
For sure.
I feel like that's one thing that we need to do more of, is uplift each other. And because sometimes they're like, yo, why you support me? Why you people who feel like that sometimes, like, why you like, and I get that. Like, I that was me. Like, it still is me sometimes. But it's like, we don't all know how to accept love. So how can you do that? Maybe try showing love.
Exactly.
And then maybe you'll get the feeling for, okay, maybe this is how it feels to receive. And I think that's something that I'm on the journey of. I'm not saying I have it figured out. I still run. Yeah. But like, it's still like, I walk back.
So yeah, man, like, I think what you were saying is super important. Like, you gotta show love. You gotta be able to receive love. And one of the best ways to learn how to receive love is by showing love. And I think that if we all focus on love, right, we're all gonna be doing better. So, this has been a fantastic conversation, bro. I appreciate you coming through. This has been another episode. If you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead, leave it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a review, 5 stars, hopefully. You can follow us both on Instagram. I'm on Instagram at _Trev Woods. You can also follow the podcast at the Global Renaissance Pod. Tchorzky, what's your Instagram? Where can they find you at?
You can find me on all platforms at Tchorzky, TCHRZKY. You already know what it is. You know the name.
Facts. Make sure you tap in with us, and I'll see you on the next episode.
See you then.